Hmm, interesting. Okay, I realize this is not that big of a deal, right? Sony's got a $700 console that they're now selling for $650 for like a week during the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2. If it was like, hey, the PS5 Pro is 600 bucks, I think there'd be a little bit more of a discussion and maybe some friction with the competition here. But I still think it's worth talking about this because in a world where prices seem to continue to go up, specifically in this industry that I love so much, it's nice to see a price going in the opposite direction, even if it's temporary. Now, initially when I had seen this, I thought that Sony was saying that their PlayStation 5 was going down to 400 bucks during the launch window of the Nintendo Switch 2, and that would have been something else. But in fairness, they are going to be offering a bundle with Call of Duty Black Ops 6, starting at the $400 mark for the digital and $450 for the physical version. Now, at that price point, that's technically cheaper than the Nintendo Switch 2, it just kind of depends on how much you value Black Ops and Mario Kart. But regardless, during the Nintendo Switch 2 launch window, there's going to be a PlayStation 5 available for $450 that includes a pack-in-game, while there's a Nintendo Switch 2 available for 500 bucks that includes a pack-in-game. And I think this deal has been around for the PlayStation 5 for a while, except it would pack in Astrobot instead. So again, depends on how you value specific games. That being said, I think what's a little bit more interesting here is this is kind of going against the grain of the patterns that we've been seeing. Many people for a very long time have been arguing that the PlayStation 5 Pro will not go down in price, as well as every other console, because they're already selling it at a loss and tariffs are coming in and inflation, so we should just accept that the prices are never going to go down. And in fact, we should be happy to pay the prices because the technology that's packed into these things is clearly worth every penny. And Nintendo pops into the picture, increases the price of their console by 50% since the last generation, which if I'm not mistaken is the largest jump between two consoles that we've ever seen. Although I think the 3DS was like a 66% jump, so that's not true. And likewise with the PS2 to the PS3 if you got the cheaper model. Oh yeah, and both of those consoles got a price cut within their first year. But whatever, that's not what we're talking about right now. Let's get back on topic. So Nintendo comes in, 50% increase on the price of the console. Roughly a 14-ish% increase on the price of games. Although that kind of depends on what you consider a new game. Like if you're just looking at the single brand new Switch games, you have Mario Kart World for 80 bucks and everything else is a little bit cheaper. But a big chunk of Nintendo's lineup is Switch 2 edition games, which are all starting at $80, which I would like to discuss a little bit more shortly. Also, I'm being nice here by saying that the Switch 1 games are 70 bucks when the only Nintendo Switch 1 game that was $70 was Tears of the Kingdom. So it's actually more realistic to say that Switch 1 games have gone up roughly 33% because they've jumped up from 60 bucks to 80 bucks. And obviously around the industry, Xbox has increased the price of their consoles. They've said that their games are also going to go up to $80. Depending on where you are in the world, Call of Duty games have gone up in price. Rockstar has quietly bumped up the price of both Red Dead Redemption games. It's just all about that line moving upwards as far as prices are concerned, pretty much across the board. So while I don't think a $650 price tag for a PS5 Pro is going to change anybody's mind that much, just the fact that Sony is offering some kind of downward discount is kind of nice to see, and they're lowering the price of their controllers and as well as having some kind of a discount on their subscription. Now again, this is only temporary, it's only for a couple of weeks, but I do think it's interesting that Sony decided to do this during such a crazy time where everybody's talking about prices going up. And not just that, they're doing it smack dab right with the launch window of the Nintendo Switch 2. It's a very smart decision on their end. Now granted, imagine if they had come out and said that the digital is $350 with a game and the physical is $400 with a game and the PS5 Pro is $600, basically an extra $50 down from all the prices during this discount. That probably would have been massive. That would have been a crazy plot twist. Sony comes in out of nowhere 2025 when all of the consoles are going up in price and they're like, hey, we're drastically dropping our price. We're the cheapest in the industry. Buy our console. Now, I guess they technically are still doing that, right? Because they have the digital edition for 400 bucks and even the physical edition for 450. And I don't know, announcing this discount bundled in with Black Ops over the course of the next 2 weeks is a huge play, in my opinion. And I don't know if it'll make that big of a change, but for once it feels like somebody's kind of going a little bit against the grain and offering something cheaper when everything else is going up. And dare I say it feels competitive? Did Nintendo increasing its price make some kind of competition between Sony and Nintendo? And is that a game that Nintendo could win? Is that a game that Sony is willing to play? Are they in their minds now going to think that Nintendo might actually be competition for them because they're in the similar price point and Sony wants to sell more units? It'll be interesting to see how this unfolds, and it might actually be a move that we, the customers, benefit from. Or it could just be a discount for 2 weeks and then we just move on from there and tariffs and prices go up and whatever. But regardless, it's something to keep an eye on. I think these companies genuinely are feeling this pushback amongst the gaming industry. I think they're feeling that people are very upset with how things have been going for a while. And what it's all going to come down to is how they react to the launch of the Switch 2, the sales number that the Switch 2 is going to get, and whoever is going to be that big player to say, hey, we understand the prices kind of went up for a bit, we're going to put them back down because we want the player to be happy, and just make up some other PR bullcrap about why they love us so much and this is why they're lowering the price. And this is going to have to come from either Sony or Nintendo. Sony is showing a sign of it already with this discount coming up right now, specifically in a $50 price drop on the PS5 Pro. But I think it's more like a test of the waters kind of situation. And also there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, right? Specifically in this industry. They don't want to be like, hey, $450 is our firm price for the PS5, and then all of a sudden the Switch 2 and the Xbox Series X both jump up $300 because of tariffs, and then now they got to backtrack on it. Whatever the case is, I think this is going to be worth keeping an eye on. And speaking of keeping an eye on something, I think Nintendo is keeping an eye on how their launch goes and how the sale of the Switch 1 games go, or rather the sale of the Switch 2 edition games, as well as some of the other first-party titles that they may or may not announce in the next couple of weeks. Because we don't have confirmation of the price of Metroid, as well as Pokemon Legends, which I think is a big part of today's discussion. We are legitimately going into the launch of a new console not knowing how much 2 games that are confirmed for this year on said console are going to cost. And 2 big games, mind you. Like, you could argue that Metroid, it's a big name but doesn't really sell that well, so I mean, who cares, not that big. I wouldn't agree, but I've seen that argument made. But Pokemon is massive. And we don't know how much it's going to cost on the Nintendo Switch 1 or the Nintendo Switch 2 at this point in time, which makes no sense to me. And it naturally makes me wonder why they would do this. Why do you not know how much a game is going to cost? Because the logical assumption here would be that they don't want to tell you how much it costs more on the Nintendo Switch 2 versus the Nintendo Switch 1 version, so they're waiting until after people buy their Nintendo Switch 2 upgrade to tell them, oh yeah, this is going to cost 10 or 20 bucks more than the Switch 1 version. Okay, so look, first of all, to kind of back up the conversation a little bit, as far as Nintendo is concerned, and the greater industry up until like this past month, the prices just jumped up to $70 in the past few years. It was a big pill to swallow, but it was understood by a lot of people. We had been at 60 bucks for quite a while, and it was just that next $10 jump that we've been getting every, I don't know, decade or so. From a Nintendo perspective, what games have cost $70 though? Because if I'm not mistaken, the only first-party title to be $70 is Tears of the Kingdom. Switch 1 games are 60 bucks. That's kind of been consistent, except for Tears of the Kingdom. If you go to Nintendo's website and you sort it from high to low, the first option is actually a Pokemon Scarlet and Violet double pack, coming in at $120, which is funny because that's just the price of both games. There's no discount there, which could be its own discussion, to be honest. But after that $120 double pack, it's Tears of the Kingdom for 70 bucks, and then everything else is 60. So as it stands right now, as far as the first-party Switch 2 edition games are concerned, we have data that shows that they're either going to be adding $10 to the base price of a Switch 1 game in order to make it a Switch 2 edition title, or they're going to add $20 and add extra features like in the case of Kirby and Jamboree. It just so happens that Tears of the Kingdom didn't get anything substantial added to it, otherwise they would have said the Switch 2 edition version of Tears of the Kingdom costs $90, and people would have rightfully lost their minds. So there are a few factors here that are genuinely concerning. First off, we don't know what Nintendo is planning on pricing the Switch 1 version of Metroid Prime 4 as well as Pokemon Legends ZA. We don't know that it's going to be $60 because it's probably not going to be $60. And technically, we don't even know if it's going to be $70. Variable pricing, right? It's not like they have a rule where they can't make the price of the Switch 1 games more expensive. It's entirely possible they see the Switch 1 version of Metroid Prime 4 as worth $80 because that's the one that has the larger install base and more people are going to buy it on. And more likely, Pokemon. So then at that point, what? Does that mean if somebody has the Nintendo Switch 2, they're gonna end up paying $90? But then at that point, wouldn't it just be smarter to buy the Nintendo Switch 1 edition and then get the free upgrade with the NSO because it's only a $10 upgrade? Or are the free NSO upgrades only limited to the Zelda titles? I think the fact that Nintendo hasn't clarified this is because they're waiting to see how everything plays out after launch. They kind of want to see what they're able to get away with based off of what people are willing to pay for the titles. And I think that's also going to determine how many games going forward end up getting both Switch 1 version and Switch 2 edition versions. The problem though is that a lot of this is very complicated. It's pretty safe to assume that games that get the free Nintendo Switch edition upgrade will only be games that are already out on the Nintendo Switch 1. Because like I said, then everybody who has a Nintendo Switch 2 would just go buy the Nintendo Switch 1 edition version, and if they're subscribed to NSO, they just save themselves $10. So it would be dumb for Nintendo to offer games like Metroid Prime 4 Beyond a free NSO upgrade if you buy the Switch 1 version. The other thing is, seeing as how the Nintendo Switch 2 is backwards compatible, many people that don't care about the graphical fidelity of these titles, as well as the jump in performance, which are more people than you would think when it comes to Nintendo consoles, are gonna be like, oh, I can just buy the Switch 1 version and play it on my Switch 2? Yeah, I'll do that. I'll save myself 10 or 20 bucks. What's the big deal? And worst case scenario, if I wanted to upgrade after that, I could just pay online and upgrade. If it's strictly a performance thing, I can see that being very common. If it's more than a performance thing, like if they were going to add extra features, like, I don't know, same style of Kirby and Jamboree, basically a DLC pack, then the difference in price from the Switch 1 to the Switch 2 version is going to be a $20 difference. And that's how they'll incentivize the newer purchase. But even then that creates another problem because now we're talking about Metroid Prime 4 and Pokemon Legends realistically costing $70 on the Nintendo Switch 1, which means if they're going to incentivize with more stuff added to the Nintendo Switch 2 edition, they're gonna charge $20, which comes out to $90. Do you guys see how confusing this gets? No matter which way you try to pick around it, nothing really makes sense from a Nintendo standpoint. They're going to be competing with themselves because they have these two consoles and they're releasing games on both of those consoles. Now, it's entirely possible that they don't create any more new games in the same vein of Metroid and Pokemon Legends, and that all future games will be Nintendo Switch 2 edition games exclusively, but then at that point they wouldn't be supporting the Switch 1 in the same way that you'd expect them to within the first year or two of the next console's life. So I don't think that's really realistic. Not in the immediate future anyway. Especially if the Switch 2 doesn't sell as much as the Switch 1 does, and if they find that the Switch 1 user base is still very active even if the Switch 2 is selling at a decent rate, they're not going to want to stop supporting it because they're going to get a lot of games sold on the Nintendo Switch 1. So here's my assumption from a business standpoint. I talk a lot about Nintendo thinking they can get away with whatever they want, but I think even they have their limits as to what they expect people to pay. I think Nintendo is actually being very smart in not saying anything is worth $90. Not in the US market anyway. They could have added more to Tears of the Kingdom and made it a $20 upgrade, but they were like, you know what, let's keep it at 80. Let's keep that maximum number at 80. At least for now, just to see how people react to it, and then we'll figure things out. And people have reacted very poorly to it. I think that's clear. So if they were to try to release any kind of Switch 2 edition upgrade going forward, saying that this game is going to cost $90 to buy it on Switch 2, I gotta imagine somebody out there is smart enough to realize how much of a terrible decision that would be. If you asked me this a month ago, I'd say maybe Nintendo didn't realize it, but I think there's just been such a large backlash to that $80 number that if they were to go up any more than that, oh, they'd have to be really brave to do that. So I think now, hopefully, they can only cap things off at $80. In their minds, they're like, that's the absolute limit we can go to, which is already nuts because $80 is ridiculous, but it's becoming normalized now. At least until people decide to not buy these games at the $80 price tag, and then we can talk. So with these cross-generational games, the Switch 2 edition games, it's hopefully safe enough to assume that these games are going to come in at $80 maximum. But I also think it's safe to assume that the minimum price they could be is $70. And I'm talking specifically about the big first-party titles. And I'm including the price of the Switch 1 versions in that discussion. If you told me that Metroid Prime 4 Beyond and Pokemon Legends were going to be coming to the Nintendo Switch for $70, I'd believe you. That's the realistic price they're going to charge. So if they're going to charge $70 for the Switch 1 version, that logically means the Switch 2 version will be $80. But at that point, like I said before, a lot of people will just be like, screw it, I'll save the $10 and buy the inferior version because that's probably going to be good enough for what they're looking for. Which means Nintendo will effectively be offering Switch 2 owners a cheaper option, which is not really Nintendo. They don't usually do that. Not on the same console anyway. So this kind of leads me to believe that there's a very good chance Nintendo is only going to have one price for both of these games. As in, the Switch 2 version and the Switch 1 version will be the same price. A lot of people have been making assumptions that the Switch 2 edition might cost more than the Switch 1 version, but I just don't see Nintendo offering an inferior version of the game at a cheaper price for something that's brand new. Now, this isn't necessarily to say that all of the games are going to be $80 automatically for the Switch 1 and the Switch 2. I think that's largely going to depend on what they think they can get away with. But I think more realistically, since the Switch 2 cartridge works on the Switch 1, they're just going to sell the Switch 2 edition and you can put it into your Switch 1. It's going to say compatible with Switch 1 on the box. And likewise, if you're going to purchase the game digitally, depending on which console you're playing on, it's just going to adapt to that version. I think this is similar to what the Xbox was doing. They were selling the same game for the same price for the Xbox One X and the Xbox Series X. And the box art usually said it was compatible with both. And I actually think this is part of the reason why Nintendo has not really been so upfront about what these games are going to cost just yet. Because we're all about to find out that Pokemon Legends and Metroid might cost $80 for the Nintendo Switch 1. Or alternatively, we might find out that whether you buy it on the Switch 1 or the Switch 2, it'll cost $70, and then Switch 1 buyers will feel hard done by this. Because at the end of the day, no matter what happens, if you're charging the same price for the Switch 2 version as you are on the Switch 1 version, the Switch 1 people are going to be wondering why they're not getting a discount for buying an inferior version of the game. But despite that, I don't think Nintendo has any intention of selling a cheaper version of the same game that you can play on that console. It just does not fit within their business practices. Like, in our minds, we're like, yeah, that's good. You get the cheaper one, and then if you want to upgrade it, it's an extra $10. But in their minds, it's like, no, you're gonna buy this at the full price, whatever you play it on. So what this all will ultimately come down to is whether or not they think they can get away with an $80 price tag for specific games. And seeing as how they think a Kirby title and a Mario Party title being sold for the Nintendo Switch 2 is worth $80, I'm getting the impression that they think they can get away with a lot of games being charged at that $80 tag. I mean, ask the question in a vacuum. Do you think Nintendo would price Metroid Prime 4 for the Nintendo Switch 2 at $80? I think it's pretty likely. I don't know if it's guaranteed, but it feels very likely. And even more likely, do you think that Nintendo is willing to charge $80 for Pokemon Legends? Yeah, I could definitely see that. What did Arceus sell? 15 million units on the Switch 1? It's going to be the first Pokemon game available on the Nintendo Switch 2? It's going to be the first new Pokemon game sold since 2022, I think? Yeah, I think they definitely will charge $80 for that game. And so at that point, if they're only going to have a single price across both consoles, that could very well mean you're buying a Nintendo Switch 1 game at $80. Now, look, maybe I am wrong. Maybe they just end up splitting the prices off and the Switch 1 version is $10 cheaper, and that's just how it works from there. But the fact that they're not laying out this information for us is very concerning. Like, you're asking customers to invest into your new console, and you have games that are set to release in 2025. It's a very dirty move to not have them know what they're investing in exactly. Like, I don't know how much these games are going to cost if I'm buying a Nintendo Switch 2. The fans of those games don't know how much they're going to cost. They're having discussions every day about, do you think this game is going to cost $70 or $80? These things need to be made a lot more clear, specifically during the launch of a console. Because as a customer, I need to have an idea of what exactly I'm investing in. What if there's somebody out there where the only two games they are actually interested in from now until the end of 2025 are Metroid and Pokemon Legends? Shouldn't they know what the price of those games are going to be on the Switch 2? We're just about halfway through the year. It's not like it's January and this game is coming out at the end of the year and we don't know how much the games are going to cost. This lack of transparency is terrible because it doesn't allow us to make informed decisions. Because the reality is they don't want you to make an informed decision. Again, in the scenario that somebody would only be interested in buying Metroid and Pokemon from now through the end of the year, they might think to themselves, well, the price of the Switch 1 version is going to be cheaper on both accounts. I don't care too much about the upgraded version. I'm just going to stick with the Switch 1. Or they might be like, you know what? I'm going to upgrade to the Switch 2. What's it going to cost me? $70 for Metroid, $70 for Pokemon, no big deal. And then all of a sudden it turns out they're each $80. Or God forbid, even $90. you're potentially looking at anywhere between a $20 and a $40 difference. Or no difference at all. Whatever the case is, it just needs to be communicated so people can plan accordingly. Because if I know that all of the games are going to cost me 80 bucks, I might be like, you know what, I'll sit this out for another 6 months and see how it plays out, wait till the new year, wait till some more games end up getting launched and announced, see how the Switch 2 is doing, and see if Nintendo backtracks on some of its policies. But no, it's just what they've been doing since they announced the Switch 2 until now. They have their lips sealed tight. Anything in regards to pricing ends up getting leaked at some point in time. And any times they're asked questions about this stuff, they just shrug it off or ignore the question entirely. I don't know, we're getting closer and closer to the launch of this console, and we still know very little about their price models going forward. And it's kind of dumb because it's very easy for Nintendo to tell you what the price of these consoles are going to be. But I mean, in fairness, they revealed everything, 2 months before the launch of the Switch 2, and they didn't say what the price of the console was going to be in that same presentation. So I guess I'm not really remotely surprised at any of this. I'm just really wondering how this launch is going to go, because I'm seeing more and more people saying they're very happy with how well Nintendo has handled the pre-order situation, making sure there are a lot of availabilities and combating scalpers and whatnot. And I'm very curious to see if this is in actuality Nintendo doing a great job making sure they have everything available for launch, or if there just isn't actually that much interest in the Switch 2. And we'll find out soon, I guess. I'm assuming they're going to have a very good first few months, maybe even first 6 months, and then it'll teeter off. Or who knows, they might just have a terrible launch, I don't know. Or they might just be the best-selling console in the world. Everything is unknown, including the price of the games that they're going to launch later this year, so this is all part of the great launch of the new Nintendo Switch 2. So we'll find out. In any case, that's enough speculation on my end for a day. I'm starting to get excited for this launch, but it's not because I'm going to be buying a Switch 2, it's more like I'm excited to see how all this plays out. Either way, thank you guys so much for joining in, and I will catch you on the next one.